You think you know how a story's going to go? A runaway bride, a wounded stranger, a cabin in a snowstorm. You figure you've heard it all before. But some stories have teeth. And this one bites down hard, right from the very first minute. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed. It was a raw, wounded sound, like something ancient and angry was being torn apart in the mountains. Snow flew sideways, a blinding sheet of white that erased the world. And in the middle of it all was me, Evelyn Hart. My hands, which once held surgical tools in Boston's finest hospitals, were shaking so bad I could barely keep the lantern lit. 3 days. 3 days I'd been hiding in this forgotten logger's cabin, running from a wedding, running from a lie so big it had tried to swallow my life whole. Better to freeze to death out here, I figured, than to live suffocated by it. My supplies were a joke. A little cornmeal, some jerky. A week, maybe, if I was lucky. After that, well, I tried not to think about that. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind. It was a horse, a high panicked whinny that cut right through the storm. I scraped the frost from the window and peered out into the chaos. There at the edge of the trees was a dark shape. A horse, a beautiful bay stallion, standing guard over a lump in the snow. My brain screamed at me to stay inside, to bolt the door and feed the fire. But the doctor in me, the part that took an oath, wouldn't listen. I wrapped myself in every piece of clothing I owned and plunged into the blizzard. The wind hit me like a fist. I fought my way from tree to tree until I reached the stallion. He was a magnificent beast, military grade, and his eyes were wild with fear. But he didn't run. He just snorted, nudging the thing on the ground with his nose. It was a man, face down in the snow, a dark, ugly stain spreading out from under him. I fell to my knees, my training taking over, fingers to his neck, a pulse, faint but there. I rolled him over gently. And that's when my blood ran cold. It wasn't just a wound. This was something different, something personal. The hole in his thick wool coat was ragged, soaked in blood that was already starting to freeze. But the edges, they weren't burned or torn like a bullet wound. They were sliced, clean, precise. Someone had used a knife on him, and not just any knife. A thin, wicked blade. This wasn't some random trail robbery. This was an execution that had failed. His face was all sharp angles and stubble, strong, weathered. But around his neck, tucked under his collar, was a thin leather cord. I pulled it free. On the end was a silver locket, not something you'd expect on a rugged frontiersman. I pried it open with a frozen thumb. I was expecting a picture, a wife, a child. But it wasn't a picture. It was a single perfectly preserved flower, a strange deep blue color I'd never seen before. Who was this man? And who would want him dead this badly? Getting him back to the cabin was a nightmare. He was dead weight, and the snow was deep. I finally had to rig up a crude sled using his own rope and some branches, with his stallion, Storm, standing by like a silent partner. Inside I went to work. The fire roared to life, melting snow for water. I pulled out my medical kit, the one thing I'd grabbed from Boston, the one thing that still felt like me. The knife had gone in deep, just below the ribs. It was a vicious, deliberate strike meant to kill. But the killer had missed the vital organs by a fraction of an inch. Lucky, incredibly lucky. As I cleaned the wound with the last of my carbolic acid, stitching the flesh back together, I found the papers in his coat. A wallet, and a name that made the hair on my arms stand up. Cole Maddox. Maddox Range, Wyoming territory. Even in Boston, I'd heard that name. A cattle baron, a king in this wild country, a man who had built an empire and defended it with iron and blood. They said he was ruthless, unbending, and now he was bleeding out on my floor. I had just finished the last stitch when I found something else tucked into a hidden pocket of his coat. It wasn't another wallet. It was a folded piece of oilskin. Inside was a map. My first thought was cattle trails, water rights, but this was no rancher's map. The lines were all wrong. They weren't marking creeks or pastures. They were marking geological formations, strange symbols I didn't recognize, all converging on a single point deep in the mountains. A place marked with a single hand-drawn sketch of that same strange blue flower from the locket. I covered him with every blanket I had and stoked the fire, my mind racing. A knife wound, a secret map, a blue flower. This wasn't a simple range war. This was something else entirely, something deeper and far more dangerous. Exhausted, I finally slumped into a chair, his heavy Colt revolver on the table beside me. I must have dozed off because I woke with a jolt. The stallion, Storm, had managed to push the door open and was now standing guard inside the cabin. A silent, four-legged sentinel. That's when I saw them. Footprints outside the window. Fresh ones. Too fresh. The snow was still falling, but these tracks were sharp, clear. They weren't the tracks of a man who had stumbled and fallen. They were the tracks of men who were hunting, circling the cabin, watching. They hadn't just left him for dead. They had followed him, and now they knew exactly where he was. My heart hammered against my ribs. I checked the bolt on the door, flimsy as it was. I shoved a chair under the knob. I looked at the man on the floor, this cattle king with a secret map, and then at the gun on the table. I'd never fired a gun in my life, but as I picked it up, the cold, heavy steel felt like the only real thing in a world that had suddenly gone insane. In his feverish sleep, Cole Maddox mumbled a name. Doyle. Thatcher Doyle. He was twisting, fighting invisible demons. Can't have it. The papers. So the stories were true. Thatcher Doyle was his rival, a man trying to steal his land and water. But that didn't explain the knife or the map. It didn't explain the feeling in my gut that this was about more than just cattle. The wind howled, and I sat there, in a stolen cabin, with a half-dead rancher, a secret map, a mysterious flower, and a gun I didn't know how to use. And outside in the storm, the hunters were closing in. I had run from my life in Boston only to stumble directly into the middle of someone else's war. And I had a terrible feeling the battle was about to begin right here, in this tiny room. The night dragged on, each minute stretching into an hour. The fire crackled, Storm snorted in his sleep, and Cole muttered names and places that meant nothing to me. The canyon, Papa's promise. It was a fever dream, a story bubbling up from his subconscious. A story I was now a part of, whether I liked it or not. Just before dawn, the fever broke. He woke with a gasp, his eyes flying open. They were the color of a thundercloud, and for a second they were completely clear. He looked at me, at the cabin, at the gun in my lap. Who are you? He rasped. The person who stitched you back together, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Now drink this. I helped him sip some willow bark tea. He winced, but his eyes never left my face. You're not from around here, he stated. It wasn't a question. And you're not a simple rancher, I countered. People don't use knives like that in a cattle dispute. His eyes narrowed. He was sharp, even half dead. He started to say something else, but then his gaze drifted to the window. His whole body went rigid. They're here, he whispered. My blood turned to ice. I peered through a crack in the shutters. 4 riders sitting on their horses just beyond the trees. They weren't rushing in. They were just watching, waiting. Doyle's men, Cole breathed, trying to push himself up. They won't leave this time. He was right. This wasn't a reconnaissance mission. This was a cleanup crew. I had to think fast. Rushing for the gun was suicide. They'd storm the place in seconds. So I did the only thing I could think of. I played the part I had run 1,000 miles to escape. I threw my shawl over my shoulders, took a deep breath, and stepped out onto the porch, leaving the gun just inside the door. I made myself small, helpless. Gentlemen, I called out, my voice trembling just enough. Is something wrong? I've been trapped by the storm. They looked at each other. The leader, a man with a nasty scar across his face, tipped his hat. Apologies, ma'am. We're looking for a man. Road this way. Might be hurt. I haven't seen anyone, I lied, letting my eyes go wide with fake fear. It's just been me. It's been so frightening out here alone. Another man chimed in. You're that Boston lady, ain't ya? The one who ran out on her wedding. I let a flush of shame color my cheeks. Yes, I whispered. I needed some time to think. Please, I have very little food. I don't want any trouble. The scar-faced man was studying me, his eyes like chips of ice. He looked past me at the cabin. Mind if we take a look around, ma'am? For your safety, of course. This was it, the moment it would all fall apart. I do mind, I said, drawing myself up, pulling on every ounce of Boston society training I had. I am an unmarried woman, alone. It would be highly improper for you to enter my residence. It was a gamble, using their rough frontier chivalry against them. For a moment it worked. The men shifted, looking uncomfortable. But Scarface wasn't giving up. We tracked him this far. Strange his tracks just end. The storm, I said quickly, and the wolves. I heard them last night. A terrible sound. I gave a delicate shudder. Perhaps they found him before you did. He stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. I could feel Cole's life hanging in the balance, hanging on this ridiculous performance. Finally, he nodded slowly. Lock your door, ma'am. Dangerous country. They turned their horses and rode away. I stood there shaking until they were out of sight. I stumbled back inside, my legs giving way. Cole was watching me, his eyes full of a new, grudging respect. You sent them away, he said, his voice rough. For now, I corrected. They'll be back. They didn't buy it completely. As I spoke, my eyes fell on the spot where the leader's horse had been standing. There, half buried in the fresh snow, was something small and metallic. A coin, a silver dollar, glinting in the pale morning light. It hadn't been dropped by accident. It had been placed. It was a marker, a signal. They hadn't been fooled at all. They were just playing a different game. They knew he was here. They were just telling their boss the exact location of his target. And that's when the second, more terrifying thought hit me. They weren't just leaving a marker for their boss. They were leaving it for me. It was a message. We know you're lying, and we're coming back. We didn't have much time. I helped Cole sit up, his face grim. They'll come back after dark, he said, when propriety won't matter. He looked around the flimsy cabin. We can't stay here. It's a tinderbox. Where can we go? I asked, my mind a blank slate of fear. The ranch is 15 miles through Devil's Pass. It's a hard ride in good weather. In this, he trailed off. It's suicide. It's better than being murdered in our sleep, I shot back. He gave me a hard look. You could tell them I forced you, that you were my hostage. They might let you go. I just stared at him. Don't insult me, Maddox. A flicker of something, surprise, maybe respect, crossed his face. All right, Hart, we ride. We moved fast. I packed my medical kit and what little food we had. Cole, moving with painful slowness, checked his revolver and pulled a rifle from Storm's saddle pack. Do you know how to use this? He asked, handing me the rifle. Not in the slightest. Good, he grunted. Then you won't be tempted to waste bullets. Just as we were about to slip out the back, there was a sound at the door. Not the heavy footsteps of Doyle's men. A soft, scraping sound. Then a low voice. Maddox, are you in there? Cole froze, his gun instantly up. We looked at each other, confused. The voice wasn't threatening. It was cautious. Who's asking? Cole called out, his voice a low growl. A friend of your father's, the voice replied, and an enemy of the men who are hunting you. The door creaked open. Standing in the doorway was a man who seemed to have been carved from the mountain itself. He was tall and lean, his face a roadmap of hard years. He was Native American, his long black hair braided with leather. He carried no rifle, only a long knife at his belt. His eyes, dark and piercing, took in the entire scene in a single glance. Me with the rifle, Cole wounded but ready, the blood on the floor. My name is Kyle, he said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. I have been tracking the men who did this to you. They are not just cattle thieves. Cole lowered his gun, but only slightly. What are they? Kyle's eyes flickered to the map that was still sitting on the table. They are looking for something that does not belong to them. Something your father swore to protect. My head was spinning. Cole's father? A promise? Before Cole could ask another question, Cale held up a hand. They are coming back. Their main party is less than an hour away, and they have dogs. He pointed toward the back of the cabin. There is a way through the mountains, a path my people use. It is dangerous, but it is our only chance. It was a crazy choice. Trust a complete stranger, follow him into a deadly mountain pass in the middle of a blizzard, or wait here to be slaughtered. It wasn't really a choice at all. We're with you, I said, before Cole could object. Kyle gave a single sharp nod. We slipped out into the raging storm, the world a whirlwind of snow and wind. Kyle moved with an unnerving silence, a ghost in the blizzard. He led us to a narrow trail I never would have seen, a path that seemed to cling to the side of the mountain by sheer will. Behind us, we could hear the baying of hounds. They were on our scent. The chase had begun. The journey through Devil's Pass was a waking nightmare. The trail was a slick ribbon of ice over a drop that would swallow you whole. Cal moved like a phantom, never slipping, never hesitating. I clung to Cole, who was mounted on Storm, my arms wrapped tight around his waist. Every jolt sent a fresh wave of pain through him. I could feel him tense, could see the blood starting to seep through his bandages again. "They're gaining!" I shouted over the wind, looking back. I could see their lanterns, little yellow eyes bobbing in the darkness behind us. We came to a rope bridge strung across a deep chasm. It swayed violently in the wind, a spider's thread between two cliffs. "We cross one at a time," Kyle yelled. "The horse can't make it." Cole slid off Storm, his face pale. "Go," he told the horse, slapping its rump. "Go home." The stallion hesitated, then with a whinny that tore at my heart, plunged into the trees, hopefully finding another way down. Cal went first, moving across the bridge with a terrifying grace. Then it was my turn. I didn't look down. I just focused on the ropes, one hand in front of the other, the wind trying to rip me from my hold. I was halfway across when a shot rang out. Splinters exploded from the wooden slat next to my hand. They were in rifle range. Cole was still on the other side. "Go, Evelyn!" he roared. He pulled his revolver and returned fire, giving me cover. I scrambled the rest of the way, collapsing onto the snowy ledge next to Cale. Cole started across, but he was slow, weakened. Another shot rang out, and this time it hit the rope support right next to him. The bridge gave a sickening lurch, dropping several feet. He lost his footing, swinging wildly, holding on by just his hands. My heart stopped. He was a sitting duck, but Cale was already moving. He uncoiled a rope from his belt, and with a flick of his wrist, sent it snaking out over the chasm. The loop settled perfectly over Cole's shoulders. "Pull!" Kyle grunted, digging his heels in. I grabbed the rope, my raw hands screaming in protest, and we hauled. We dragged Cole, hand over hand, up the cliff face, bullets whining past our heads. We tumbled into a heap on the ledge just as the bridge finally gave way, plummeting into the darkness below. We had made it, but we were cut off and Cole was bleeding badly. As I worked to rebandage his wound, using strips torn from my own petticoat, the locket around his neck fell open. I saw the blue flower again, and this time Cale saw it too. His eyes widened. "The sky tear," he breathed. "He carries the sign." "What does it mean?" I asked, my fingers sticky with Cole's blood. "It is a sacred plant," Cale said, his eyes distant. "It grows in only one place, a hidden canyon, the place on the map. It is a place of power, a place my people have guarded for 1,000 years. So that's what this was about. Not water, not cattle, not land. It was about this sacred flower, this hidden canyon, and Thatcher Doyle wanted it. But why? The pursuit had fallen back for now. We pressed on, Cole leaning heavily on me and Cale. Hours later, through the swirling snow, I saw lights. A ranch. "Home?" Cole mumbled, his voice weak. But as we got closer, a feeling of dread crept over me. The lights were wrong. Too few of them. The main house was lit, but the bunkhouse was dark. There was no smoke from the chimneys. The place felt empty. We stumbled toward the main house and a rifle barrel poked out from the shadows of the porch. "That's far enough," a voice called out. It was a woman's voice, young but hard as nails. "Molly, it's me," Cole called out. A young woman burst from the door, her rifle still raised. She had Cole's gray eyes and a jaw set with the same stubbornness. She took in the scene. Cole bleeding, me in rags, Cal standing like a statue, and her eyes went wide. "They said you were dead," she whispered. Then her gaze hardened. "Get inside. Now." The house was a fortress, built to withstand a siege, but it felt hollow. "Where is everyone?" Cole asked as his sister Molly helped him into a chair. "Gone," she said, her voice bitter. "Doyle came 2 days ago. Said you were dead. Showed some official-looking papers saying he owned our water rights now. Gave the hands a choice. Work for him or get out. Most of them got out." Her eyes fell on Cale. "What's he doing here?" "He saved our lives," I said, before Cole could answer. Then another voice came from the corner of the room. "He's not the only one she brought home." Sitting in a chair, tied up but unharmed, was a boy. No older than 17. He was wearing the same kind of gear as Doyle's men. "Caught him snooping around the barn last night," Molly said with a grim satisfaction. "He was left behind." The boy was terrified, his eyes darting between us. Cole, despite his pain, fixed him with a stare. "Talk," he commanded, and the boy talked. His words tumbled out in a rush of fear. Thatcher Doyle wasn't the real power. He was just a front man, a local face for a much bigger fish. A railroad tycoon from back east named Alistair Finch. Finch didn't give a damn about cattle or water. He'd heard rumors, old prospectors' tales, of a rare mineral deposit in the Wyoming mountains. A mineral that was crucial for a new, revolutionary steelmaking process. The stakes of this fight had just exploded. This wasn't about a ranch anymore. This was about the future of industry, about a fortune that could build cities. And our tiny group was standing right in the way. The captive boy, whose name was Sam, confirmed everything. Finch had hired Doyle to acquire the land legally if possible, by force if necessary. The map was the key. Finch's geologists believed it led directly to the main deposit. "They ain't just thugs, mister," Sam stammered, looking at Cole. "They're professionals. Finch's private army." While Molly stood guard, I turned my attention to the papers Doyle had used to scare off the ranch hands. I spread them out on the kitchen table. They looked official enough to fool most people. But my years in Boston, dealing with hospital accreditation and legal contracts, had taught me to see the details. "These are forgeries," I said, my voice tight with certainty, "and sloppy ones at that." I pointed to the territorial seal. "This seal wasn't put into use until 1888. This document is dated 1887. I showed them other things. A signature from a clerk who had died a year before the paper was supposedly signed. Ink that was too fresh, paper with the wrong watermark. It was a house of cards built on lies. But then I saw something else. A faint smudge along the margin of the main deed. I held it up to the lamplight, turning it this way and that. It looked like a watermark, but it was in the wrong place. On instinct, I held the edge of the paper close to the lamp's chimney. The heat hit the paper, and my breath caught in my throat. Faint brownish letters began to appear, like ghosts rising from the page. It was writing, in invisible ink. It was a coded message. I couldn't understand most of it, but a few words stood out clear as day. "Frame the tribe. If Maddox resists, final solution." My God, this wasn't just a backup plan. It was a contingency for genocide. If they couldn't get the land from Cole, they were going to murder him and then frame Cale's people for it, using the ensuing chaos to have the federal government seize the hostile territory. Then Finch could walk in and take whatever he wanted. "They're not just trying to kill you," I told Cole, my voice shaking. "They're planning to wipe out Cale's entire tribe to cover their tracks." Before this new horror could even sink in, Molly yelled from the upstairs window, "Riders coming! A lot of them!" We rushed to the windows. A small army was descending on the ranch, at least 30 men. They weren't riding for a frontal assault. They were spreading out, surrounding us. And they were carrying strange equipment, not just rifles and ropes, but surveying tools, tripods, transits, measuring chains. "What are they doing?" I whispered. Cole's face was grim. "They lost the map when we crossed the bridge. They're going to survey the entire valley. They're going to find that canyon by brute force." They weren't just laying siege to the house. They were laying siege to the land itself. We were trapped, the four of us, and a terrified boy against a private army with a license to kill. And as the first shovel hit the frozen ground outside, I knew we were running out of time. The house became our world. We barricaded the doors, distributed our pitifully small supply of ammunition to the windows, and waited. The feeling of helplessness was crushing. We could watch them, this army of surveyors, as they methodically worked their way across the valley, driving stakes, taking measurements, slowly but surely mapping every inch of Cole's land. They were ignoring us for now, confident that we were trapped and irrelevant. "We need to fortify the cellar," Cole said, his voice raspy. "If they breach the house, we make our stand there." As we moved old crates and barrels in the dusty cellar, my hand brushed against a loose stone in the foundation wall. Curiosity got the better of me. I worked it free. Behind it was a small, dark cavity. I reached inside and my fingers closed around a metal box. It was an old lockbox, heavy and rusted. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a journal. "It was my father's," Cole said, his voice full of reverence. We read it by candlelight, the words of a dead man reaching out across the years. It was all there. His father, John Maddox, had been a prospector before he was a rancher. He had been the one to discover the mineral deposit. But he had also discovered the sacred canyon and met Cale's father, the chief of the tribe. The journal told a story not of greed but of respect. John Maddox had seen the beauty and spiritual significance of the canyon. He understood what it meant to the tribe, and he had made a promise. He swore he would never reveal its location, that he would act as a guardian, using his ranch as a buffer to keep outsiders away. The map wasn't a path to treasure, it was a warning, a record of the one place on his land that must never be touched. This fight wasn't just for Cole, it was his father's legacy, a sacred trust passed down from one generation to the next. Reading those words changed something in the room. Our small, desperate group felt a little less small. We weren't just fighting for property anymore. We were fighting for a promise. "There's a judge in the next town," Molly said suddenly. "Judge Whalen. He's a hard man, but he respected Papa. Even if we could get a message to him, he'd never make it through that perimeter," Cole countered. An idea sparked in my mind. A desperate, insane idea. "They're not watching the whole perimeter," I said, thinking aloud. "They're focused on the survey. They expect us to be hiding. They don't expect a breakout." I looked at Sam, the captive boy, huddled in the corner. "You said you were left behind. Where were you supposed to meet them?" He looked up, startled. "An old line shack, about 5 miles east of here." "They'll have men posted there," Cole said. "Exactly," I replied, "but they won't expect anyone to come from that direction." My plan was simple and probably suicidal. Sam would create a diversion on the west side of the ranch, drawing the guards' attention. At the same time, Cale would slip out the back and make a run for Judge Whalen's town. Sam, who had been listening with wide, terrified eyes, suddenly straightened up. "I can do better than a diversion," he said, his voice shaking but firm. "There's a shed on the west side where they store their blasting powder for clearing rock." A slow grin spread across Molly's face. "You're a Maddox after all," she said to me, clapping me on the shoulder. We worked fast. Cal prepared to leave, melting into the shadows like he was born to him. Sam, armed with a map Molly drew him of the ranch's back ways, got ready for his part. "Why are you doing this?" Cole asked him. "You could just stay here. Stay safe." Sam looked at the journal, at my forged papers, at the grim determination on our faces. "My pa always said you choose the man you want to be," he said quietly. "I don't want to be one of them." He slipped out into the darkness. A few minutes later, Cal followed. Then we waited. The minutes felt like years. Every gust of wind sounded like a gunshot. Then the night exploded. A massive fireball erupted on the far side of the valley, lighting up the sky. The blast was huge, far bigger than we expected. It shook the very foundations of the house. Shouts and confusion erupted from the surveyors. Men started running toward the fire. The diversion was working. In the chaos, we hoped, Kyle had slipped through. But our relief was short-lived. A new group of riders appeared, coming not from the valley but from the main road. At their head were 2 men. One was Thatcher Doyle. The other was a man I had never seen before. He was dressed in an expensive city suit that looked completely out of place here. He sat on his horse with an air of absolute authority, his face cold and impassive. He wasn't a thug. He was the man who gave the orders. "That must be Sterling," Cole breathed. "Finch's man." The explosion hadn't just been a diversion for us. It had been a signal for them. The waiting was over. The real attack was about to begin. The man named Sterling rode forward, holding up a hand to stop his men. He didn't shout or make threats. He just stared at the house as if it were an insect he was about to crush. Thatcher Doyle, looking smug, trotted up beside him. "Maddox," Doyle yelled, "your time is up. We have a federal order." A man on horseback rode forward and tacked a piece of paper to the gatepost. A federal order, signed by a territorial judge, declaring the Maddox Ranch a site of significant geological interest, essential for national expansion. It granted Alistair Finch's company full rights to survey and seize the land under the law of eminent domain. It was a checkmate. Our forged papers, our claim of ownership, it all meant nothing against this. They had used the law itself as a weapon. The marshal, even if Cale reached him, would be powerless to stop it. We hadn't just lost the battle. We had lost the war. The air went out of the room. Molly sank into a chair, her face pale. Cole stood like a statue, his hands clenched into fists, the weight of his father's legacy crushing him. They had us. They had won. My mind was racing, desperately searching for a way out, for some angle we had missed. My eyes landed on the locket, which I had placed on the mantel next to John Maddox's journal. The flower, the sky tear. Cale had called it a sacred sign. But what if it was more than that? I grabbed the journal, frantically flipping through the pages. I found the entry where John Maddox described his first meeting with Cale's father. He wrote about the canyon, about the strange blue flowers that grew there in abundance. Then I saw the line I had skimmed over before. The chief calls the flower the Watcher. He says it only grows where the heart of the mountain is close to the surface. It is their guide. "That's it," I whispered. Everyone looked at me. "It's a bioindicator," I said, the words tumbling out. "In Boston, we learned about plants that only grow in specific types of soil. This flower, the sky tear, it doesn't just grow in the canyon by chance. It only grows where that mineral is present." Cole and Molly stared at me, not understanding. "So?" Molly asked. "Don't you see?" I said, my excitement growing. "Finch's claim is based on a geological survey, but Cale's people have a claim that's much, much older, a claim based on their sacred traditions. On this flower." Cole's eyes lit up with a spark of hope. "The treaty?" he breathed. "My father mentioned a treaty the tribe signed with the U.S. government back in the 60s. It guaranteed them sovereignty over their sacred lands." We tore through the lockbox again, and there it was, at the very bottom. The original treaty, signed by the chief and a U.S. Army general. It specifically granted the tribe undisputed ownership and protection of all lands marked by the sky tier, the sacred herb of our people. The federal order was based on the land being public territory. But if this treaty was valid, then the canyon wasn't public land. It was a sovereign nation. Finch's order was null and void. We had a chance, a tiny sliver of a chance. But Sterling wasn't a man who left things to chance. Just as our hope was rekindled, a carriage pulled up the road, a fancy Eastern carriage. Two people got out, a well-dressed older woman and a younger man. My blood ran cold. I knew them. It was Mrs. Catherine Worthington, my former employer's wife from Boston, and with her was her son James, my ex-fiancé. Doyle and Sterling weren't just here to take the land. They had brought my past with them to destroy my future. Sterling had found my one great vulnerability, the scandal I had run from, and he had brought it right to my doorstep to use as the final, killing blow. Catherine and James Worthington were escorted to the front lines by Sterling himself. He handed a megaphone to my former would-be mother-in-law. "Evelyn Hart!" Her voice, sharp and cold, echoed across the valley. It was the voice that had condemned me in Boston, the voice of a society that had cast me out. "We have come to take you home, to save you from this disgrace." James stepped forward. "Evelyn, please, it's not too late. Just come with us. My father can make all of this go away. The scandal, everything." It was a perfectly laid trap. Sterling wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the marshal and the judge, who we could now see arriving on the horizon, Cale at their side. Sterling was painting a picture for them before they even arrived. I wasn't a credible witness. I was a hysterical, fallen woman who had run away from a life of privilege to live in sin with a rough rancher. A woman whose word meant nothing. My testimony about the forgeries, my discovery of the treaty's meaning, it would all be dismissed as the ravings of a scorned, unreliable woman. I could see the doubt already starting to form on Judge Willen's face as he rode up. This was Sterling's true genius. He wasn't just fighting with laws and guns. He was fighting with reputation, with prejudice, and he was about to win. I felt Cole's hand on my shoulder. "Don't listen to them," he said, his voice a low growl. But I saw the look in his eyes. He knew how bad this was. But then I looked past him, at Molly, her jaw set, at the memory of Cale's quiet dignity, at the words in John Maddox's journal. I had been running from Catherine Worthington's world my whole life, running from their judgment, their rules, their cages, and I was done running. I walked out onto the porch alone. I held up my hands to show I was unarmed. "Catherine," I called out, my voice clear and steady, "you've come a long way to tell a story." Sterling smiled, sensing his victory. But he had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me, and he had no idea about the secret I had been keeping. The patient who had died under my care in Boston, the one whose death had caused the scandal, wasn't just a wealthy woman. Her father was a United States Senator, Senator Thompson, a very powerful, very private man who chaired the Senate Committee on Territorial Expansion, the very committee Alistair Finch needed to approve his railroad grants. The scandal hadn't just been about me being a convenient scapegoat. It had been a massive cover-up orchestrated by the hospital and the Worthington family to protect the senator from the political fallout of his daughter's tragic death. "The woman who died," I said, my voice ringing with newfound power, "was Senator Thompson's daughter. And the story you all agreed to tell, the story of my negligence, was a lie to protect him." A shocked silence fell over the valley. Catherine Worthington's face went white. Sterling's smug smile vanished. This wasn't part of his plan. I wasn't done. And now Alistair Finch's man, Mr. Sterling, is using that same lie, that same family tragedy, to try and blackmail me into silence while he steals this land. I turned to the newly arrived marshal. "Marshal Avery, I believe you'll find that attempting to leverage a United States Senator's personal tragedy for corporate gain is a federal crime." The tables had turned so fast it was like lightning had struck. Sterling was no longer a master manipulator. He was now implicated in a massive political scandal that could ruin his boss. He had tried to use my past against me, but he had given me the very weapon I needed to destroy him. Cole stepped out onto the porch to stand beside me. He wasn't looking at Sterling. He was looking at Marshal Avery. "Marshal," Cole said, his voice like iron, "you have a choice. You can enforce Finch's illegal, voided order and become an accessory to this conspiracy. Or you can uphold a federal treaty, arrest these men for attempted murder and fraud, and protect the sovereign land of the tribe that has lived here for 1,000 years. Checkmate. Sterling saw it in an instant. The risk was too great. The potential scandal would destroy Finch. With a look of pure fury, he gave a sharp, almost invisible signal to his men. He was cutting his losses. "This is a misunderstanding," Sterling said smoothly to the marshal, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "Mr. Doyle seems to have misled us. We withdraw our claim." Just like that, he threw Thatcher Doyle to the wolves. Doyle's face was a mask of disbelief and rage as Marshal Avery's men surrounded him and his thugs, placing them under arrest. Sterling, ever the professional, tipped his hat. "Miss Hart," he said, with a look that was equal parts respect and hatred, "you are a more formidable opponent than I was led to believe." He and his surveyors packed up their equipment and were gone within the hour, leaving the Worthingtons standing alone and humiliated in the middle of the valley. Justice, when it finally came, was swift and absolute. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. The treaty was honored. The Maddox claim was restored. Thatcher Doyle was sentenced to 20 years in prison, and the story of the Boston runaway who faced down a railroad tycoon became a local legend. My name was cleared, not in a stuffy Boston courtroom, but here, in the wide open spaces of Wyoming, by my own actions. A year later, the snow was falling again, but this time it wasn't a blizzard. It was a gentle, quiet snowfall, blanketing a land that was finally at peace. The old grain shed was now the Hart and Maddox Clinic, a beacon of healing for the whole valley. A formal pact had been signed between Cole's family and Cale's tribe, making them joint guardians of the valley and the sacred canyon, just as their fathers would have wanted. One evening, Cole took me to the rise overlooking the creek, the same spot where his father had proposed to his mother. The snow was falling, dusting our shoulders. He didn't have a fancy speech. He wasn't that kind of man. He just took my hand. "I'm not asking you to be a rancher's wife, Evelyn," he said quietly. "I'm asking you to be my partner. In the ranch, in the clinic, in life." He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a new deed for the Maddox Range, and right there next to his name was mine, Evelyn Hart Maddox. I had come to these mountains looking for a place to hide, but instead, I found a place to stand. I found a home. I found a man who didn't see a runaway bride or a disgraced doctor, but a woman who was strong enough to fight for what was right. And in this wild, beautiful, and dangerous land, I had finally found myself. "Yes," I told him. 1,000 times, yes. It's funny how life works out. Sometimes the worst thing that can ever happen to you, the storm that you think is going to destroy you, is actually the very thing that leads you to where you were meant to be all along. This story had teeth, all right, but sometimes when you find the courage to bite back, you discover a strength you never knew you had. If you enjoyed this story of courage and justice on the frontier, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every story has a lesson, and I think the lesson of this one is that you should never, ever underestimate a woman with nothing left to lose. What did you think? Was Evelyn right to stand and fight? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. Until next time, stay safe and always be ready for the storm.